On a lonely stretch of wilderness somewhere beyond the maps of early America, travelers whispered about a road that existed only after sunset. Those who found it never agreed on where it led. Some claimed it ended beside an ordinary farmhouse. Others swore it disappeared into endless forests where no birds sang. Yet every traveler remembered one strange detail, an old lantern hanging from a wooden post, burning with a flame that never consumed its oil. Tonight, we follow the forgotten journal of a man who spent 30 years searching for that impossible road, and what he finally discovered changed the final pages of his life forever. Welcome back to Sleepless Historian Salavora, where forgotten legends, quiet mysteries, and long-lost histories gently unfold while the rest of the world falls asleep. Tonight's tale blends forgotten frontiers, lonely forests, fading memories, and a mystery passed from one generation to another. Settle into your chair, lower the lights, and allow the quiet rhythm of this story to carry you into another century. Now, our journey begins. Autumn arrived earlier than expected in the northern frontier. Long before railroads stitched distant towns together, before telegraph wires crossed rivers and valleys, there existed enormous stretches of untouched wilderness where silence ruled more faithfully than any government ever could. The forests seemed endless. Towering white pines blocked much of the afternoon sun, while ancient oak trees stretched heavy branches across narrow animal trails. Thick blankets of moss softened every fallen log, and cool streams wandered lazily between rocky hills before disappearing beneath tangled roots. Travelers often measured distance not by miles but by sunsets. One valley could require an entire day to cross. One mountain ridge might separate two settlements that had never spoken despite living only 20 miles apart. In those days maps remained imperfect. Surveyors frequently argued over rivers that appeared during one season but vanished the next. Entire lakes were drawn where marshes actually stood. Roads sometimes ended without explanation because the people creating the map simply turned around before reaching the wilderness beyond. Few questioned these mistakes. The frontier itself changed faster than ink could dry. Among the scattered settlements stood a modest trading post called Ash Hollow. It barely deserved to appear on official records. 23 families lived there. A blacksmith. A miller. A carpenter whose hands shook whenever winter approached. 2 widows who baked bread together every Friday morning. Children who spent their afternoons skipping stones across the creek instead of attending school whenever weather allowed. Life moved quietly. Predictably. The seasons governed nearly everything. Spring brought planting. Summer demanded labor. Autumn prepared everyone for survival. Winter tested every promise they had made to themselves. Yet every evening, just before darkness settled over the valley, something curious happened. The elders gathered beside the trading post. Not to gossip. Not to trade. Simply to watch the western road. No one explained why. The younger residents noticed this strange habit but rarely questioned it. Eventually curiosity faded into routine. Children accepted that grandparents simply liked watching sunsets. Visitors assumed it honored some forgotten tradition. Only one person refused to ignore the mystery. His name was Nathaniel Rowan. At 26 years old, Nathaniel had inherited his father's journal after a severe winter fever claimed the older man's life. Inside the weathered leather notebook appeared thousands of careful observations. River levels. Animal tracks. Weather patterns. Sketches of unfamiliar flowers. Locations of abandoned cabins. Names of travelers met decades earlier. Nathaniel admired his father's patience. Every page reflected a man determined to understand the wilderness instead of conquer it. Late one rainy afternoon, while organizing shelves inside the family cabin, Nathaniel noticed several pages stuck tightly together. Carefully separating them, he discovered writing unlike anything elsewhere in the journal. The handwriting remained his father's. But the tone had changed completely. The words appeared rushed. Almost nervous. If anyone ever asks about the Lantern Road, tell them nothing. Nathaniel frowned. There followed several crossed-out paragraphs. Then another sentence. Some places remain peaceful only because people stop searching for them. Nothing more. No explanation. No map. No dates. Just silence. That evening Nathaniel carried the journal toward the trading post, hoping someone older might recognize the strange reference. The familiar gathering had already begun. Old Samuel Bennett leaned against the fence watching distant hills. Margaret Ellis knitted without once looking down. Benjamin Clark smoked his pipe beside the well. All three quietly faced the western road. Nathaniel approached. "Has anyone heard of something called the Lantern Road?" Silence. Margaret stopped knitting. Samuel slowly removed his hat. Benjamin's pipe slipped slightly from his mouth. The wind itself seemed to hesitate. Finally Samuel spoke. "You found those pages." Nathaniel blinked. "You knew my father wrote about it?" Samuel sighed deeply. "He wasn't supposed to." Benjamin quietly added. "We all promised." Nathaniel waited. No one continued. Instead Margaret carefully folded her blanket and stood. "Go home before dark." Nathaniel laughed softly. "That's hardly an answer." "It wasn't meant to be." She walked away. Benjamin soon followed. Samuel remained only long enough to place one weathered hand upon Nathaniel's shoulder. There are stories that become stronger each time someone repeats them. Then he too disappeared into gathering darkness. Nathaniel stood alone. The western road stretched toward distant hills where fading sunlight painted golden bands across the trees. Nothing seemed unusual. No mysterious lantern. No impossible road. Only ordinary wilderness. Yet something had undeniably frightened three people who had survived wars, harsh winters, and decades of frontier hardships without showing fear. That night sleep refused to come. Rain tapped gently against cabin windows. The fireplace crackled softly. Nathaniel reopened his father's journal. He searched every page. Every margin. Every folded corner. Near midnight another clue appeared. Tiny numbers hidden beside entries describing completely unrelated journeys. Page after page contained similar markings. At first they seemed meaningless. Until Nathaniel realized they matched page numbers. Turning to each referenced page revealed certain words lightly circled. When read together they formed a sentence. "Wait where the last crow leaves before sunset." Nathaniel stared at the message for a long time. His father had hidden it deliberately. Someone afraid of being discovered would write exactly this way. Outside, thunder rolled quietly beyond distant mountains. A single crow called somewhere across the valley. Then another. By morning, Nathaniel had made his decision. He would follow the final secret his father had left behind. Not because he believed impossible roads existed. But because no man spends decades recording nature with absolute honesty, only to invent one unbelievable lie without reason. As dawn spread pale light across Ash Hollow, Nathaniel packed only what he truly needed. A compass. A blanket. Fresh water. 3 days of dried food. His father's journal. And an old brass lantern that had belonged to his grandfather. He locked the cabin door. Looked once toward the peaceful village. Then quietly began walking west. Toward the place where, according to a forgotten sentence hidden between ordinary journal pages, the last crow always disappeared before sunset. Nathaniel left Ash Hollow before the morning mist had lifted from the valley floor. The village slowly disappeared behind him, swallowed by layers of silver fog drifting through the pines. Before long, even the faint sound of the blacksmith's hammer faded into silence. The wilderness accepted him without ceremony, as though it had been expecting his arrival for years. His father's journal remained tucked safely inside his satchel. Every few miles he stopped, comparing the old sketches with the landscape around him. Surprisingly, almost everything matched. A crooked oak leaning over a narrow stream. A split granite boulder shaped like the prow of a ship. A hillside where hundreds of tiny white flowers bloomed despite the rocky soil. His father had walked this route many times. That realization brought both comfort and unease. If these pages were accurate, then perhaps the hidden message was as well. By noon the forest had changed. The tall pines gave way to older hardwood trees whose branches stretched across the sky like the ribs of some forgotten cathedral. Moss covered nearly every surface, muting Nathaniel's footsteps until he seemed to glide rather than walk. Even the birds sounded different. Instead of cheerful morning songs, only distant calls echoed between the trunks. The air smelled damp. Ancient. Almost untouched. Nathaniel paused beside a shallow creek to refill his flask. As he knelt, he noticed something unusual beneath the clear water. A horseshoe. Not rusted. Not broken. Perfectly preserved beneath smooth stones. He reached down and lifted it. The iron looked old enough to belong to another century, yet it showed almost no signs of decay. Stranger still, no horse tracks appeared anywhere nearby. He turned the horseshoe over several times before slipping it into his pack. His father had once written. Asterisk, the forest remembers what men forget. Asterisk. Nathaniel wondered what that meant. The afternoon passed slowly. Several deer watched him from distant ridges. A fox crossed the trail without the slightest concern. Twice he discovered abandoned campsites. Each contained the remains of old fire pits carefully surrounded by stones. Whoever had camped there had cleaned the area before leaving. No broken bottles. No scraps of cloth. No discarded tools. Only circles of blackened earth. It was as if travelers had wished to leave no trace that they had ever existed. Near sunset the terrain began rising. The climb became steeper. Loose stones rolled beneath his boots. Small cliffs overlooked endless forest stretching toward the horizon. Nathaniel finally reached a rocky overlook just as the sun dipped low. He sat down to rest. From there he could see hundreds of birds returning toward their evening nests. Crows. Dozens of them. Perhaps hundreds. They flew west in loose groups, disappearing behind a distant ridge. Nathaniel remembered the hidden sentence. Asterisk, wait where the last crow leaves before sunset. Asterisk. He watched carefully. Minute after minute passed. Most of the birds vanished beyond the ridge. Then only 3 remained. Then 1. The final crow circled alone above the trees. Instead of following the others, it landed upon a dead pine standing by itself on a nearby hillside. The bird remained perfectly still. Watching. Not Nathaniel. Something behind him. Slowly he turned. Nothing. Only forest. When he looked back, the crow was gone. Without thinking, Nathaniel stood and walked toward the lonely tree. The hillside felt strangely quiet. No insects buzzed. No squirrels darted across fallen branches. Even the wind seemed weaker. The dead pine towered above everything around it. Lightning had stripped away most of its bark decades earlier. Its pale trunk glowed faintly beneath the fading light. Nathaniel examined the ground. Nothing unusual. Then he noticed shallow grooves carved into one exposed root. Not words. Symbols. Simple circles connected by straight lines. They resembled stars joined together into unfamiliar constellations. He copied them into the journal. As he finished, a breeze stirred the leaves behind him. A lantern swung gently from a branch. Nathaniel froze. He was certain it had not been there moments earlier. It hung from an iron hook fastened high above his reach. The lantern looked handmade. Copper frame. Thick glass. No soot. No rust. No candle inside. Yet a warm amber light glowed softly within it. Impossible. He stepped closer. The flame produced no smoke. No sound. Only light. He reached upward. The instant his fingertips brushed the lantern, the light vanished. Complete darkness rushed over the hillside. Not ordinary night. Something deeper. The stars themselves seemed to disappear. Nathaniel instinctively stepped backward. His boot struck solid wood. He looked down. A road. Not dirt. Not stone. Wooden planks. Freshly built. Stretching between the trees. Seconds earlier there had been only grass. Now an entire road extended into the darkness in both directions. He blinked repeatedly. The road remained. Perfectly straight. Perfectly silent. His pulse quickened. Every sensible thought urged him to turn around. Return home. Forget everything. Yet curiosity outweighed caution. He removed his grandfather's brass lantern from his pack and lit it. Its ordinary yellow flame flickered nervously. Compared to the mysterious lantern above, it seemed almost fragile. Nathaniel took one careful step onto the wooden road. The planks did not creak. They felt strangely warm beneath his boots. He took another step. Then another. Behind him, the forest slowly disappeared into darkness until only the road remained visible. No trees. No sky. Only endless blackness surrounding a narrow wooden path. He stopped walking. The silence became overwhelming. Then, far ahead, a faint bell rang once. Soft. Clear. Like the bell hanging above the entrance of a small country store. Nathaniel waited. Several seconds later. Another bell. Closer this time. Then another. And another. Each ringing grew louder. Not because someone approached. But because the road itself seemed to carry the sound toward him. A cold breeze brushed his face. His lantern flame leaned sharply backward. Something was moving through the darkness. Not visible. Only heard. Slow footsteps. Measured. Patient. Wood touched wood. Step. 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 Nathaniel raised his lantern. The sound stopped instantly. Silence returned. Then, from somewhere beyond the reach of the light, an old man's calm voice spoke. "You carry Rowan blood." Nathaniel's heart pounded. He could see no one. The voice continued. "I wondered, how many years would pass before another of your family found this road?" Nathaniel swallowed carefully. "Who are you?" The darkness answered without hesitation. "I have been waiting longer than you can imagine." The bell rang one final time. Then, slowly, a shadow began walking into the circle of lantern light. The figure emerged with the slow confidence of someone who had walked the same road for a lifetime. Nathaniel instinctively tightened his grip on the brass lantern. At first, only a pair of worn leather boots appeared. Then a long gray coat. Weathered hands. Finally, the old man's face stepped into the light. He looked neither frightening nor particularly mysterious. His white beard reached nearly to the middle of his chest. Deep wrinkles surrounded calm blue eyes that carried the quiet patience of someone who had spent countless years simply observing. His hat was faded almost colorless. Rain, wind, and sunlight had long ago erased whatever color it once possessed. Yet one detail immediately caught Nathaniel's attention. The man's clothes bore no dirt. Not a single leaf clung to his boots despite the forest that should have surrounded him. Everything appeared impossibly clean. The old man smiled faintly. "You look exactly like your grandfather." Nathaniel frowned. "You knew him?" "I knew your father." A pause. And his father before him. Nathaniel's heartbeat quickened. My grandfather died long before I was born. I know. The old man's voice carried no sadness. Only certainty. Nathaniel studied him carefully. I've never seen you in Ash Hollow. You never would. Why? Because this road does not belong to Ash Hollow. The answer only deepened the mystery. Nathaniel glanced behind him. The darkness remained absolute. No forest. No stars. No moonlight. Only the wooden road disappearing into endless blackness. You still haven't told me your name. The old man considered the question for several moments. Finally he answered. Names lose importance after enough years. Nathaniel waited. The man smiled again. But once, they called me Elias. Nothing more. No family name. No explanation. Nathaniel decided not to press further. Instead he asked the question that had haunted him since discovering his father's journal. What is this place? Elias looked down the road before answering. A road. I can see that. Can you? Nathaniel blinked. Elias continued walking. Not away. Past Nathaniel. Slowly. His footsteps remained perfectly silent. After several yards he stopped. Tell me what you noticed when you first stepped onto it. Nathaniel thought carefully. The forest disappeared. Good. What does that mean? It means the road accepted you. Nathaniel frowned. Accepted me? Elias nodded. Others never noticed the forest disappear. How many others? The old man looked into the darkness. Fewer each generation. They walked together without speaking. The wooden plank stretched endlessly ahead. Nathaniel occasionally looked down. Each board appeared freshly cut. Smooth. Golden. Free from cracks or decay. It was impossible. Even the finest lumber would weather after decades. These planks looked as though they had been placed only yesterday. Finally Nathaniel asked. Who built this road? Elias answered without hesitation. No one remembers. You do. I remember walking it. Isn't that the same thing? No. Silence returned. Nathaniel realized the old man never answered questions directly. Instead, every response created two new mysteries. After what felt like an hour, something appeared ahead. A wooden bench. Simple. Unpainted. Standing beside the road. Nothing else surrounded it. No trees. No buildings. Just the bench. Elias sat. Nathaniel remained standing. You should rest. I'm not tired. You will be. Reluctantly Nathaniel sat beside him. The wood felt pleasantly warm despite the cool air. For several minutes neither man spoke. Then Elias pointed into the darkness beyond the road. What do you see? Nathaniel looked carefully. Nothing. Look longer. He did. At first there truly was nothing. Gradually. Shapes began forming. Very faint. Like reflections appearing upon calm water. A farmhouse. Children running through tall grass. A woman hanging laundry. Smoke rising from a chimney. The vision shimmered softly before fading away. Nathaniel stared in disbelief. What was that? A memory. Whose? Elias shrugged. The road never says. More images followed. A soldier embracing his family. An elderly woman reading beside a fireplace. Two brothers repairing a fishing boat. A schoolteacher writing upon a slate. Each vision appeared for only a few seconds before dissolving into darkness. Nathaniel watched in silence. They're beautiful. They're ordinary. Exactly. Elias smiled. Most lives are. Eventually Nathaniel asked the question that had quietly lingered in his mind. My father came here. Many times. Why? Elias answered almost immediately. To remember. Remember what? The things worth remembering. Nathaniel frowned. My father barely mentioned this place. He promised not to. Why keep it secret? The old man leaned forward slightly. Tell me something. Nathaniel nodded. If every person could revisit their happiest memory whenever they wished, how long before they stopped making new ones? Nathaniel remained silent. Elias continued. If every grieving parent could spend one more evening watching a lost child laugh, how many would ever leave? Nathaniel slowly understood. If every lonely soul returned to one perfect day, they would never return home. The realization settled heavily between them. The road was not dangerous because it harmed people. It was dangerous because it tempted them. Elias stood. We should continue. Where does it end? It doesn't. Every road ends. Not this one. Nathaniel laughed softly. That makes no sense. Neither does tomorrow. Nathaniel looked confused. Elias continued walking. You've never seen tomorrow. What? You've trusted it your entire life without ever touching it. Nathaniel smiled despite himself. You enjoy speaking in riddles. No. I enjoy watching people think. The road gradually widened. Far ahead, faint lights appeared. Dozens of them. Perhaps hundreds. Floating gently above the darkness like distant stars. Nathaniel stopped walking. What are those? Elias did not answer immediately. Instead, his expression became unusually serious. The lanterns. The ones people talked about. Yes. They're beautiful. They're waiting. For whom? Elias looked directly at Nathaniel. For anyone who forgets why they came. A quiet wind swept along the wooden road. The floating lights slowly drifted closer. Each glowed with a warm golden flame. As they approached, Nathaniel realized they were indeed lanterns. Old-fashioned. Handmade. Every one unique. Some were brass. Some copper. Some iron. No two looked alike. Hundreds floated silently through the darkness without visible chains or hands to carry them. One lantern paused directly before Nathaniel. Inside its flame, he saw his childhood home. His mother smiling from the porch. His father splitting firewood nearby. The memory was perfect. Every detail. Every sound. Even the smell of fresh bread seemed to drift from the tiny flame. Nathaniel reached toward it almost without thinking. Elias spoke quietly. Careful. Nathaniel hesitated. The lantern floated closer. Inside the light. His mother looked toward him. She smiled. Then slowly. She raised one hand. As if inviting him home. Nathaniel's fingertips trembled only inches away from the warm glass. The lantern remained perfectly still. Waiting. Patient. Silent. Behind him, Elias did not move. Did not shout. Did not interfere. He simply watched. Because the next choice could never be made by anyone except Nathaniel himself. Nathaniel stared into the lantern without blinking. The tiny flame danced gently behind the glass, yet the image inside remained perfectly clear. His mother stood on the porch exactly as he remembered her. The faded blue dress she always wore during autumn. The apron dusted with flour. A loose strand of brown hair moving softly in the breeze. She smiled with the same warmth he had not seen since childhood. Then she spoke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Simply as she always had. "Nathaniel, supper is almost ready." His breath caught. It was her voice. Every note. Every pause. Every familiar kindness. For one impossible moment, the years between then and now vanished. He was no longer a grown man wandering a forgotten road. He was a little boy racing home before sunset. His hand slowly rose toward the lantern. Just another inch. The warm light reflected across his fingertips. Then he heard another voice. His father's. Not from the lantern. From his own memory. Asterisk, if anyone ever asks about the lantern road, tell them nothing. Asterisk. Nathaniel froze. His father had known. He had stood here. He had looked into these same lights. Perhaps he too had seen the faces he loved. Slowly, Nathaniel lowered his hand. The lantern remained motionless for several seconds. The smiling image inside faded gently, like morning fog beneath sunlight. His mother never looked disappointed. She simply became smaller and smaller until only the golden flame remained. Without a sound, the lantern drifted away to join the others. Elias finally spoke. "Well done." Nathaniel exhaled deeply. "That wasn't my mother." "No. But it felt real." "Yes." "What was it?" Elias watched the floating lights disappear into the darkness. "The road doesn't create lies." Nathaniel waited. "It creates possibilities." They continued walking. The lanterns slowly vanished behind them until only darkness remained once again. Nathaniel felt strangely exhausted. Not physically. Emotionally. The brief glimpse of his childhood had stirred memories he had carefully buried beneath years of ordinary life. For a long while, neither man spoke. Finally Nathaniel broke the silence. "Did my father touch one?" Elias nodded. "Once." "What happened?" "He nearly stayed." Nathaniel stopped walking. "My father?" "Your father loved your mother very deeply." Nathaniel looked down. His mother had died when he was only 8 years old after a harsh winter illness spread through Ash Hollow. His father had never remarried. Never even considered it. He saw her. Elias nodded quietly. "He stood exactly where you stood. And he reached farther than you did." Nathaniel felt a knot tighten inside his chest. What stopped him? Elias smiled faintly. "You." Nathaniel looked up. "What do you mean?" "Your father remembered something." "What?" "He remembered a promise." Nathaniel said nothing. Elias continued. "He once told me, if I remain here, my son will grow old believing I abandoned him." The old man looked down the endless road. So he turned away. Nathaniel felt his eyes sting. For years he had quietly wondered why his father always seemed distant after his mother's death. Now, standing on this impossible road, he finally understood. The silence had not been emptiness. It had been sacrifice. Hours passed. Or perhaps only minutes. Time no longer behaved normally here. Nathaniel noticed that his watch had stopped completely. The hands pointed to exactly 7 o'clock. No matter how often he checked, they never moved. "You noticed." Nathaniel looked toward Elias. "My watch. The road has no use for clocks." "Why?" "Because memories don't measure themselves in hours." Nathaniel slipped the watch back into his pocket. Oddly enough, he no longer cared what time it was. Eventually the wooden road reached a gentle hill. At its summit stood something entirely unexpected. A library. Not enormous. Not grand. Simply a modest wooden building with warm light glowing through its windows. Smoke drifted lazily from a stone chimney. Flower boxes rested beneath each window despite there being no visible soil. The building looked wonderfully ordinary. Nathaniel stared. A library? Elias nodded. Yes. Here. Of course. Nathaniel laughed softly. I expected something stranger. Elias smiled. Most people do. They climbed the steps. The wooden door stood slightly open. As Nathaniel entered, the comforting scent of old paper, polished wood, and dried herbs surrounded him. Thousands of books filled shelves stretching from floor to ceiling. Ladders rested against towering bookcases. Oil lamps cast soft golden circles across polished wooden floors. Somewhere deeper inside, pages turned by themselves. No one seemed to be there. Nathaniel whispered. Who takes care of this place? Elias answered. The readers. Nathaniel wandered slowly between the shelves. Every book looked different. Some were bound in faded leather. Others in cloth. Some appeared centuries old. Others seemed almost new. One title immediately caught his eye. The Baker Who Never Missed Sunrise. Another read. A Fisherman's Last Summer. Another. 27 Winters at Pine Creek. None sounded famous. None described kings, wars, empires, or great discoveries. Instead they celebrated completely ordinary lives. Nathaniel pulled one from the shelf. The pages opened effortlessly. Inside was not fiction. It was someone's life. Every birthday. Every conversation. Every mistake. Every quiet happiness. Written with astonishing detail. He read only a few paragraphs before closing it carefully. Whose story is this? Elias answered from another aisle. A man who made shoes. Was he important? He was to his daughter. Nathaniel smiled. Another book. The widow beside the mill. Another. The boy who planted apple trees. Another. The carpenter's quiet promise. Thousands upon thousands of ordinary people. Nathaniel slowly understood. History had forgotten them. But this place had not. Near the center of the library stood an empty wooden table. Upon it rested a single blank book. Its cover bore no title. Only one word was pressed gently into the leather. Rowan. Nathaniel stopped. His heartbeat quickened. He looked toward Elias. The old man had already expected this moment. Go ahead. Nathaniel approached cautiously. He opened the cover. The first pages were filled with beautiful handwriting. His grandfather's life. His childhood. His hopes. His fears. His marriage. Every detail. Then came his father's story. Every journey. Every hardship. Every sacrifice. Even the day Nathaniel had been born. Nathaniel turned another page. The handwriting changed. The next page was blank. Except for one sentence. Asterisk, the rest has not yet been lived. Asterisk. Nathaniel looked up slowly. What is this place? For the first time since they had met. Elias did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the nearest window and gazed into the endless darkness beyond the glass. Then, in a quiet voice barely louder than a whisper, he said. This road remembers every life the world eventually forgets. Nathaniel felt a chill run through him. Outside. Somewhere far beyond the library. A distant door slammed shut. The sound echoed through the darkness. Elias closed his eyes. They've found the road. Nathaniel frowned. Who has? The old man's calm expression disappeared for the very first time. There are others coming. The echo lingered through the endless darkness. It did not sound like the ordinary closing of a wooden door. It sounded heavy. Deliberate. As though something old had awakened after a very long sleep. Nathaniel looked toward the entrance of the library. Nothing moved. The lamps continued burning with their steady golden light. Dust drifted lazily through the air. Every book remained perfectly still upon its shelf. Yet the peaceful atmosphere had changed. Not because of noise. Because of expectation. Elias quietly closed the book marked Rowan. His hands, which had never trembled before, now rested upon the leather cover a little longer than usual. Nathaniel noticed. "You said someone found the road." "I did." "Who?" Elias looked toward the front door. "People who search for the road for the wrong reason." Nathaniel frowned. "There are right and wrong reasons. There always have been." The old man walked slowly toward one of the tall windows. Outside, darkness rolled like an endless ocean. Then, tiny lights appeared. Not the warm golden lanterns Nathaniel had seen before. These lights were cold. White. Sharp. They moved quickly. Far too quickly for people carrying lanterns on foot. Nathaniel narrowed his eyes. "What are those?" Elias answered quietly. "Greed." Nathaniel looked confused. "I don't understand." "You will." Several minutes passed before the lights drew closer. Nathaniel finally realized they were not floating. They belonged to lanterns swinging from the hands of travelers. 4 of them. Perhaps 5. Impossible to count from this distance. "They're coming here." "Yes." "Do they know about the library?" "They know enough." Nathaniel turned. "How?" Elias sighed. "Every generation produces someone who mistakes memories for treasure." Nathaniel remembered the stories he had heard as a child. Lost mines. Hidden gold. Secret military payrolls buried during forgotten wars. Every frontier town possessed at least one impossible legend. "You mean they think there's treasure here?" "They always do. But there isn't." Elias smiled faintly. "There is." Nathaniel looked around the room. "The books?" "The books." Nathaniel laughed softly. "No one risks their life for old journals. You'd be surprised." Elias removed a weathered volume from a nearby shelf. Its leather cover had faded almost black with age. He placed it gently into Nathaniel's hands. "Read the first page." Nathaniel opened it. The title simply read, "The Last Physician of Black River." Below it appeared neat handwriting. Asterisk, "If these pages survive me, then perhaps kindness survives a little longer too." Asterisk. Nathaniel turned another page. The physician described treating strangers who could never repay him. Children. Travelers. Widows. Laborers. Not once did he complain. Not once did he boast. Only quiet observations about ordinary compassion. Nathaniel looked up. "It's beautiful." "It is. So why would anyone steal it?" "Because some people believe forgotten knowledge can be owned." A sudden knock echoed through the library. 3 slow knocks. No louder than polite visitors announcing themselves. Nathaniel instinctively looked toward the door. Elias remained still. Another 3 knocks. Exactly the same rhythm. Then a calm voice came from outside. "We know someone is inside." Nathaniel whispered. "Do you know them?" "No. They sound harmless." "They've practiced sounding harmless." The old man quietly extinguished the nearest oil lamp. Then another. Then another. Only a few remained burning. The library grew dim. The voice returned. "We don't wish to cause trouble." Nathaniel whispered. "Shouldn't we answer?" Elias shook his head. "No." "Why?" "They aren't asking permission." The handle slowly turned. It did not move. The door remained locked. Silence. Then came another voice. Younger. Less patient. We've searched 20 years. A third voice answered. We're finally here. Nathaniel could hear boots shifting outside. At least 4 people. Perhaps more. One of them laughed quietly. Not with joy. With certainty. They said the keeper would never let us in. Keeper. Nathaniel glanced toward Elias. The old man simply stood beside the shelves. Completely calm. As though he had heard those words hundreds of times before. Nathaniel whispered. They called you the keeper. I've been called many things. So, you protect this place. I protect a choice. What choice? Elias looked directly into Nathaniel's eyes. The choice to remember without possessing. Outside, metal scraped softly against wood. Someone had begun working on the lock. Nathaniel's heartbeat quickened. They're breaking in. No. Elias answered quietly. They're trying. Nathaniel listened carefully. The strange part was. The scraping never grew louder. The same sound repeated again and again. Almost like someone attempting the same movement without success. Minutes passed. Nothing changed. Nathaniel slowly approached one of the windows. He peered outside. The travelers stood exactly where they had been before. Yet something impossible had happened. Every time one of them reached the door, he somehow found himself 3 steps farther back. As though the distance reset itself. Again. And again. And again. None of them seemed to notice. One man reached for the handle. The next instant he was once again standing beside the stone path. Confused. He tried again. The same thing happened. Nathaniel stared in disbelief. They can't reach it. No. They don't even realize it. No. Why? Elias smiled gently. The road only allows people to arrive. Nathaniel frowned. What does that mean? It never promised anyone they could enter. The oldest traveler suddenly stopped. Unlike the others, he removed his hat and looked slowly around him. His expression changed. Not to anger. To sadness. He seemed to notice something the others had missed. Nathaniel watched as the old traveler quietly sat upon the front steps. He made no further attempt to enter. Instead, he simply closed his eyes. Moments later, a golden lantern appeared beside him. Not in his hand. Beside him. Its warm light glowed softly against the darkness. Nathaniel looked toward Elias. You knew that would happen. Elias nodded. The road finally asked him why he came. What was his answer? We'll never know. Outside, the old traveler slowly stood. He picked up the lantern. Turned away from the library. And calmly walked back into the darkness without saying a single word to his companions. The others shouted after him. He never looked back. One by one, their voices faded. Until only silence remained. Nathaniel exhaled. So, it's over. Elias did not answer. Instead, he looked toward the highest shelf in the library. Nathaniel followed his gaze. A book. One that had rested untouched since they arrived. Slowly slid outward by itself. It fell onto the wooden floor with a dull thud. The cover opened. Its pages turned rapidly without any wind. Finally. They stopped on a single page. Only one fresh sentence appeared in dark ink, as though an invisible hand had just written it. Nathaniel stepped closer. The words were simple. Asterisk, the keeper's watch is ending. Asterisk. Nathaniel looked toward Elias. The old man's peaceful smile had returned. But this time, it carried the quiet acceptance of someone who had been expecting this sentence for many years. Nathaniel stared at the open book. The fresh ink still glistened upon the page. No quill rested nearby. No hand had written the sentence. Yet the words remained unmistakably real. The keeper's watch is ending. For several long moments, neither man spoke. The silence inside the library felt heavier than before. Not frightening. Respectful. Like the quiet inside an old church after everyone has gone home. Nathaniel finally broke it. What does it mean? Elias looked down at the page. It means the road has begun writing the next chapter. You mean? My work is nearly finished. Nathaniel frowned. You've lived here your entire life. Elias smiled. My entire remembered life. Nathaniel had grown accustomed to the old man's unusual way of speaking, yet this answer unsettled him more than any before. What does that mean? Elias slowly walked toward the fireplace. He placed another log upon the glowing embers. The flames rose softly. I no longer remember where I was born. Nathaniel blinked. You forgot. No. The road allowed the unnecessary parts to become quiet. Nathaniel sat in one of the wooden chairs. So you don't remember your parents? I remember they loved me. Their names? Elias gently shook his head. My hometown. Another shake. My first home. Silence. Nathaniel whispered. Doesn't that frighten you? Elias looked thoughtfully into the fire. It did. When? The first 100 years. Nathaniel laughed awkwardly. Then he stopped. Elias had not been joking. You've been here. The old man simply smiled. Nathaniel never finished the question. Outside the windows, the darkness slowly changed. Tiny golden lights drifted across the endless road. Unlike the lanterns Nathaniel had seen before, these floated in loose groups. They looked almost like fireflies. Beautiful. Peaceful. What are they? The memories no one speaks aloud anymore. Nathaniel watched them dance through the darkness. They're disappearing. They always do. Can they be saved? Elias nodded toward the bookshelves. Some already have been. Nathaniel walked slowly through another section of the library. Here the books appeared much older. Their leather bindings had nearly turned to dust. One title caught his attention. The Girl Who Returned Every Lost Letter. Another. 3 Brothers and the Frozen River. Another. The Bell That Rang for 50 Winters. Each title described ordinary people. Ordinary places. Ordinary kindness. History books rarely remembered such lives. Yet somehow, this library had preserved every one. Nathaniel quietly asked. Who writes these? The people themselves. How? They live. Nathaniel looked confused. Elias explained. Every honest choice writes another sentence. Nathaniel opened another volume. Inside he found no dramatic adventures. Instead, he read about a farmer who spent 40 years planting one oak tree every spring. People laughed at him. They called him slow. Foolish. Obsessive. When he died, thousands of travelers rested beneath the forests he had planted. Nathaniel closed the book. No one would ever know this story. Elias nodded. Exactly. A gentle bell rang somewhere deep inside the library. Not loud. Soft. Almost welcoming. Elias immediately stood. It's time. For what? The final room. Nathaniel followed him through narrow aisles he had not noticed before. The shelves gradually became shorter. The lamps brighter. Eventually they reached a plain wooden door. Unlike every other part of the library, this door carried no decoration. Only a small brass handle. Elias rested one hand upon it. "I've never brought anyone here before." Nathaniel felt suddenly nervous. "Why me?" "You'll understand." The old man slowly opened the door. Beyond it lay a circular room unlike anything Nathaniel had imagined. The ceiling stretched impossibly high. Thousands. No. Millions of tiny lights floated overhead like stars inside a night sky. The walls contained no books. Instead, they were covered with clocks. Every shape. Every size. Tiny pocket watches. Grandfather clocks. Ship chronometers. Mantle clocks. Simple wooden clocks carved by hand. None matched. Yet every single one had stopped. Their hands pointed to different hours. Nathaniel whispered. "Why are they all broken?" "They're not. They've stopped." "Exactly. I don't understand." Elias walked to the center of the room. Every clock stopped at the moment someone lived the memory that defined them. Nathaniel slowly turned in a circle. There were countless clocks. So every person has one. Nathaniel noticed a small empty space upon the far wall. No clock hung there. Only an unused brass hook. He pointed toward it. "What's missing?" Elias followed his gaze. "Yours." Nathaniel stared. "My clock isn't here." "Not yet. Because I'm still alive." Elias smiled. "Yes." Nathaniel let out a slow breath. For reasons he could not explain, that answer filled him with relief. They remained in the room for several quiet minutes. Nathaniel examined dozens of clocks. One had stopped at sunrise. Another at midnight. Some still carried scratches from years of use. Others looked almost new. No labels identified them. No names. Only silence. Finally Nathaniel asked. "How do you know whose is whose?" "I don't." "You don't?" "The road remembers." Without warning. One clock began ticking. Just one. A slow, steady tick, tick, tick. Nathaniel turned toward the sound. It came from an old brass pocket watch hanging near the center of the wall. Every other clock remained still. Only this one moved. Elias closed his eyes. "It has begun." Nathaniel whispered. "What has?" "The choosing." "The choosing of what?" Elias looked directly at him. "The next keeper." Nathaniel's heart began to race. "No." Elias remained silent. "I just came here to understand my father's journal." Silence. "I can't stay." Still silence. "I have a home." Finally Elias nodded. "I know." "Then why are you looking at me like that?" The old man smiled with genuine kindness. "Because every keeper said exactly those same words." Nathaniel backed away. "I'm leaving." "You may. I won't become whatever this place made you." "It never made me anything." Nathaniel reached the door. He pulled it open. Beyond it, there was no library. No hallway. No shelves. Only the endless wooden road stretching into darkness. He looked back. The circular room had vanished. Elias now stood alone beneath the floating lights. The old man spoke one final sentence before the door slowly closed by itself. "The road never asks someone to stay." Nathaniel frowned. "Then why am I here?" From behind the closing door came Elias' quiet answer. "It asks them why they wish to leave." The door shut. Nathaniel stood alone on the silent wooden road once again. Ahead. Far in the darkness, a familiar golden lantern slowly appeared. But this time, it was not showing his past. Inside its warm flame, Nathaniel saw something impossible. He saw an older version of himself, standing inside the very same library, wearing Elias's long gray coat, smiling gently as another lost traveler stepped through the door. Nathaniel's blood ran cold. The lantern drifted silently toward him, waiting. Nathaniel did not move. The lantern floated silently before him, its warm amber glow illuminating the wooden planks beneath his boots. Inside the flame, the older version of himself remained perfectly still. His hair had turned silver. Deep lines surrounded his eyes. The long gray coat rested comfortably upon his shoulders. He looked peaceful. Not trapped. Not lonely. Simply, content. Then the image smiled. Not at the traveler entering the library. At Nathaniel himself. The lantern gently drifted closer. Nathaniel stepped backward. No. His voice disappeared into the endless darkness. The lantern continued forward. Patient. Never forcing. Never chasing. Only waiting. Nathaniel turned away and began walking as quickly as he could. Then faster. Soon he was running. His boots pounded across the wooden road. The darkness rushed past him. He expected the lantern to follow. It did not. After several minutes he slowed to catch his breath. The road ahead remained empty. The lantern was gone. Only silence remained. Nathaniel leaned forward, breathing heavily. Then he laughed. Not because anything was amusing. Because he suddenly realized something impossible. Despite running with all his strength, he was standing exactly where he had begun. The same plank beneath his feet bore a tiny knot in the wood he remembered noticing moments earlier. The same faint scratch crossed one board. He had not traveled anywhere at all. A calm voice spoke behind him. The road lets people hurry. Nathaniel closed his eyes. It simply refuses to hurry with them. He turned. Elias stood several paces away. His expression held neither disappointment nor satisfaction. Only understanding. Nathaniel sighed. I tried. I know. I couldn't leave. You could. Nathaniel looked around. Then why am I still here? Elias slowly walked beside him. Because your feet and your heart chose different directions. They resumed walking together. This time neither man spoke for a long while. Nathaniel found himself thinking about his father. About Ash Hollow. About the ordinary cabin waiting for him beyond the impossible road. Then another thought entered his mind. If I stay here. Elias looked at him. What happens to my home? The old man answered immediately. They continue. Without me. Yes. My friends. They grow older. The village. It changes. Nathaniel lowered his head. And eventually. They remember you. Nathaniel looked up. For how long? Elias smiled sadly. As long as love allows. The words remained with Nathaniel as they walked. He remembered the baker who always saved the warmest loaf for children. The blacksmith whose laugh echoed across the valley. Old Samuel watching the western road every evening. Margaret quietly knitting beside the trading post. One day. Every one of them would be gone. Even if Nathaniel returned. Time would eventually claim them all. History would move forward. The world would continue. Yet here. Inside the library. Their stories would remain forever. Hours later, they reached a small wooden bridge crossing a stream unlike any Nathaniel had ever seen. The water glowed faintly. Not blue. Not silver. Golden. Tiny lights drifted beneath its surface. What river is this? Elias rested one hand upon the bridge railing. It has many names. What do you call it? The river of forgotten voices. Nathaniel knelt beside the water. As he listened carefully, he realized the river was not flowing. It was whispering. Thousands of voices. Soft. Gentle. Too quiet to understand. Yet somehow comforting. He looked toward Elias. They're talking. Yes. What are they saying? No one hears the same words. Nathaniel closed his eyes. Gradually, one voice became clearer. A little girl. Laughing. Then another. An elderly man humming while working. Then someone reading aloud beside a fireplace. Simple moments. Ordinary conversations. Nothing extraordinary. Just life. Nathaniel opened his eyes. Their memories. Elias nodded. The ones no book was ever written about. They crossed the bridge. On the other side stood a lone apple tree. Its branches were heavy with bright red fruit. Nathaniel immediately noticed something unusual. The ground beneath the tree contained no fallen apples. Not one. Despite the abundance above. Elias picked a single apple. He handed it to Nathaniel. It won't make you stay. Nathaniel smiled. I wasn't worried. You should never assume that. Nathaniel examined the fruit. Its skin reflected the lantern light like polished glass. He took one careful bite. The taste stopped him completely. It wasn't sweeter than any apple he had eaten before. It wasn't unusual at all. It simply tasted. Exactly like the apples his mother used to harvest every autumn. Perfectly familiar. Perfectly ordinary. He slowly swallowed. I've never tasted anything like this. Elias chuckled. You have. Nathaniel looked confused. You simply forgot. They rested beneath the tree until the silence was broken by distant footsteps. Real footsteps. Not echoes. Not memories. Someone was approaching. Nathaniel stood. A young woman appeared along the road carrying a small oil lantern. Her clothes were worn from travel. Dust covered her boots. She looked exhausted. When she noticed Nathaniel and Elias, relief washed across her face. Oh, thank goodness. Her voice trembled slightly. I thought I was alone. Nathaniel stepped forward. Who are you? My name is Eleanor. She looked around nervously. I've been trying to find the old ferry road. Nathaniel exchanged a glance with Elias. There isn't a ferry here. I know. She frowned. At least. I don't think there is any more. She reached into her satchel and carefully unfolded a yellowed map. Nathaniel immediately recognized the handwriting. It matched the notes inside his father's journal. His heart skipped. Where did you get this? Eleanor looked surprised. It belonged to my grandfather. Nathaniel carefully examined the map. One corner bore a familiar signature. Thomas Rowan. His grandfather. Nathaniel looked up slowly. That's impossible. Eleanor blinked. Why? Nathaniel swallowed. Because Thomas Rowan was my grandfather too. Silence filled the road. Elias watched them both without surprise. Nathaniel turned toward him. You knew. I suspected. Eleanor looked from one face to the other. What's happening? Elias smiled gently. The road has begun gathering the next chapter. Nathaniel looked once more at the faded map in Eleanor's hands. His grandfather had drawn 2 copies. One had remained with his family. The other had somehow traveled across generations to someone he had never met. For the first time since stepping onto the lantern road, Nathaniel realized the mystery had grown much larger than his own family. And somewhere beyond the darkness, the road was still leading someone else toward them. Nathaniel could not take his eyes off the faded map. The paper had become thin with age. The edges were carefully stitched with thread where they had begun to tear decades earlier. Every line upon it had been drawn by the same steady hand he recognized from his grandfather's journal. Only one thing was different. Near the bottom corner, written in faded brown ink, appeared a sentence Nathaniel had never seen before. Asterisk, if two paths survive, neither should walk alone. Asterisk. Nathaniel whispered the words aloud. Eleanor looked surprised. You can read it? Of course. My grandfather always said the writing only appeared when the time was right. Nathaniel slowly lowered the map. What was your grandfather's name? William Carter. Nathaniel frowned. The names don't match. They wouldn't. Eleanor smiled sadly. He wasn't related by blood. Nathaniel looked confused. He was found. Elias quietly nodded. I wondered when that story would return. Nathaniel turned toward him. You know about William? I knew the man who found him. Eleanor's eyes widened. My grandfather always believed the story was true. What story? Nathaniel asked. Eleanor carefully folded the map. When my grandfather was about 6 years old, he was discovered wandering through the forest after a terrible winter storm. No family. No one ever came looking. Nathaniel listened carefully. The only thing he carried. She held up the map. Was this. The three travelers continued together along the wooden road. For the first time since arriving, Nathaniel no longer felt alone. Eleanor walked with quiet confidence despite the impossible surroundings. She asked questions without fear. She noticed small details. She reminded Nathaniel of himself. After nearly an hour, she looked toward Elias. You've walked here a long time. A little while. She smiled. My grandfather warned me about answers like that. Nathaniel laughed. He never gives a straight answer. Elias looked genuinely puzzled. I've answered every question honestly. Nathaniel and Eleanor exchanged amused glances. Eventually they reached a place where the road divided into 3 separate paths. Each looked identical. Each disappeared into darkness. No signs marked them. No footprints crossed the planks. Nathaniel stopped. Which one do we take? Elias remained silent. Eleanor studied the 3 roads carefully. Then she closed her eyes. After several moments, she stepped confidently toward the center path. Nathaniel looked surprised. How did you know? I didn't. You guessed. She smiled. My grandfather always said. She paused. The correct road never feels louder than the others. Nathaniel frowned. What does that mean? I have no idea. She laughed softly. But somehow it made sense. Elias quietly followed her. Nathaniel realized she had chosen correctly. The darkness gradually changed once again. Instead of endless blackness, faint outlines of enormous trees appeared on both sides of the road. Unlike any forest Nathaniel had seen before. Their trunks were wider than houses. Their branches disappeared beyond sight. Golden leaves drifted lazily through perfectly still air. Not one leaf ever reached the ground. Halfway down, each simply dissolved into tiny points of light. Nathaniel reached toward one. The glowing leaf vanished before touching his hand. What forest is this? Elias answered softly. The forest of unfinished stories. Nathaniel looked upward. Why unfinished? Because every life ends before every dream does. Eleanor stopped beside one of the giant trees. Someone had carved thousands of tiny names into its bark. Some were easy to read. Others had nearly disappeared beneath new growth. Nathaniel recognized none of them. Yet every name looked lovingly carved. Never rushed. Never careless. Eleanor gently touched one. "What are these?" Elias smiled. "Promises." Nathaniel frowned. "Promises? The ones people truly intended to keep." Nathaniel looked across the endless forest. Every tree was covered. Millions of names. Millions of promises. Some fulfilled. Some forgotten. Some perhaps still waiting. As they continued, Nathaniel noticed something unusual about Elias. The old man had become quieter. His steps had slowed. Several times he paused without explanation. Nathaniel finally asked, "Are you tired?" Elias looked surprised. "I had forgotten that feeling. You don't look well." The old man smiled. "I look exactly as I should." Nathaniel didn't like the answer. Neither did Eleanor. Near sunset, or what felt like sunset, since no true sky existed, they arrived at a small wooden house beside the road. It was even simpler than the library. A stone chimney. A rocking chair on the porch. Flower pots filled with lavender. A kettle gently steaming over a fire. No one appeared to live there. Yet everything looked carefully maintained. Nathaniel looked toward Elias. "Whose house is this?" The old man answered quietly. "Mine. You live here." "When I sleep." Nathaniel smiled. "I thought keepers never slept." "We remember to." Inside, the house contained only 3 rooms. A tiny kitchen. A bedroom. And a study. Nathaniel immediately noticed the study walls. Instead of books, hundreds of maps hung neatly from floor to ceiling. Not maps of countries. Not oceans. Not mountains. Each map showed a person's life. Nathaniel stepped closer. One map resembled a winding river. Another looked like branching roots. Another formed a spiral. "What are these?" Elias carefully removed one. This belonged to a teacher. Nathaniel examined it. The lines connected thousands of tiny dots. No roads. No. No cities. No. Then what am I looking at? Elias pointed gently. Every important choice. Nathaniel stared. Every turn. Every branch. Every intersection. Represented a decision someone had made. Small choices. Large choices. Moments no history book would ever record. Yet together, they formed an entire life. Eleanor suddenly gasped. She had discovered another map hanging alone in the corner. Unlike the others, it was blank. Completely empty. Except for 3 tiny circles near the center. Nathaniel walked over. "What is it?" Elias looked at the map for a long time before answering. "It hasn't been drawn yet." Nathaniel frowned. "Whose life is it?" The old keeper slowly looked first at Nathaniel. Then at Eleanor. Finally back to the blank map. His voice was almost a whisper. "It belongs." He paused. "To the person who will decide what becomes of the Lantern Road after me." A long silence settled over the little house. Nathaniel felt the weight of those words. Until now, he had quietly assumed the road wanted him alone. Now, there was another possibility. Perhaps it had never chosen him. Perhaps it had brought 2 descendants of the same forgotten journey together for a reason neither of them yet understood. Outside the cottage, a soft wind began to blow for the very first time. The lantern hanging beside the front door started to sway. Then, without anyone touching it, Its golden flame suddenly turned blue. Elias looked toward the window. His calm expression disappeared. He spoke only 4 quiet words. "They've crossed the boundary." Nathaniel's pulse quickened. "Who?" Elias didn't answer. Because far beyond the cottage, deep within the darkness, several unfamiliar lanterns were approaching. And unlike every traveler who had come before, these lights were blue. The blue lanterns moved in perfect silence. Nathaniel counted them once. 6. He counted again. There were only 5. A third glance revealed 7. The number refused to remain the same. The lights drifted between the giant trees without casting shadows. Even stranger, they did not illuminate the road. Their pale blue glow seemed to absorb light rather than create it. Nathaniel felt the temperature around him fall. The warmth inside Elias's cottage slowly disappeared. Eleanor quietly stepped beside the window. "Have you seen them before?" Elias answered without taking his eyes off the approaching lights. "Only twice." Nathaniel looked toward him. "What happened?" The first keeper disappeared. Silence. The second never returned. Nathaniel swallowed. "You told me the road wasn't dangerous." "It isn't." "Then who are they?" Elias finally turned away from the window. "They are not part of the road." The room grew still. The kettle above the fireplace continued to whisper softly. Outside, the blue lanterns came closer. Yet no footsteps accompanied them. Only silence. Nathaniel instinctively reached for the brass lantern his grandfather had carried. Its warm flame still burned steadily. Unlike the blue lights outside. Elias noticed. "Good." Nathaniel frowned. "What?" "You remembered to bring it." "I almost left it behind." "I'm glad you didn't." A slow knock echoed across the cottage. Once. Then twice. Then 3 times. Exactly the same rhythm used by the treasure hunters at the library. Nathaniel glanced toward the door. Elias remained perfectly calm. No one moved. The knocking stopped. Several seconds passed. Then a gentle voice spoke from outside. "We seek shelter." Nathaniel looked toward Elias. "They sound ordinary." "They always do." The voice continued. "We've walked a very long way." Eleanor whispered. "Shouldn't we help them?" Elias looked sadly toward the window. If they were truly travelers. He paused. They would already be inside. Nathaniel frowned. "I don't understand." "The road welcomes those who travel honestly." He pointed toward the door. "I never lock it." Nathaniel looked. The wooden latch indeed hung open. No bolt. No key. Nothing prevented anyone from entering. Yet whoever stood outside continued knocking. As though an invisible wall separated them from the cottage. The voice spoke again. "We know the keeper is there." No answer. "We know his time is ending." Still silence. "We've come to take his place." Nathaniel's heart quickened. Elias slowly shook his head. "That isn't how it works." The reply came immediately. "We can learn." "No." "We can protect the road." "No." "We deserve the knowledge." The old keeper closed his eyes. "No one deserves memory." Without warning, the blue lanterns outside brightened. Their pale flames stretched unnaturally high. The windows frosted over despite the warmth of the fire. Nathaniel watched tiny crystals spread across the glass. Eleanor rubbed one clear circle with her sleeve. She suddenly gasped. Nathaniel hurried beside her. Outside, there were no people. Only lanterns. Each floated alone. No hands carried them. No travelers stood beneath them. Yet the voices continued speaking. Nathaniel whispered. "There isn't anyone out there." Elias nodded. "I know." The blue lantern nearest the porch slowly drifted upward until it hovered directly outside the window. Inside its cold flame, Nathaniel saw something moving. Not a memory. A face. His own. But different. Older. Harder. The kindness had disappeared from his eyes. This version of Nathaniel wore the keeper's gray coat. Yet the library behind him looked empty. The bookshelves were bare. Dust covered the floor. The lamps had gone dark. Nathaniel stared. "What is this?" Elias answered quietly. "Possession. I don't understand." "You've already seen who you might become if you choose to serve." Nathaniel remembered the warm golden lantern from before. The older version of himself had looked peaceful. Gentle. Content. Elias continued. "Now the blue lantern shows who you become." He paused. "If you choose to own." Nathaniel felt a chill run through him. The figure inside the blue flame slowly reached toward a shelf. One by one, the books crumbled into ash. Not because they were old. Because no one remained to remember the lives within them. Nathaniel looked away. The lantern instantly drifted backward. Eleanor suddenly called out. "Mine." Nathaniel turned. Another blue lantern floated before her. Inside its pale light, she saw a different future. She quietly stepped back. Her face had gone pale. Nathaniel did not ask what she had seen. He didn't need to. Whatever it was, it had frightened her deeply. The voices outside spoke together now. Not loud. Perfectly calm. Memory should belong to those strong enough to protect it. Elias answered through the closed door. Memory belongs to those willing to share it. We would preserve it forever. No. We would never allow it to fade. It must. The voices fell silent. Nathaniel looked confused. After a moment he whispered. "Why must memories fade?" Elias turned toward him. "Because forgetting creates room for new lives." The answer settled over the room. Nathaniel thought about Ash Hollow. Every child born. Every elder buried. Every season replacing the last. Nothing remained forever. Perhaps that was not a flaw. Perhaps it was the reason life continued at all. Outside, the blue lanterns slowly dimmed. One by one, they drifted away from the cottage. No anger. No threats. No final warning. They simply disappeared into the darkness. The frost upon the windows melted. Warmth returned. The fire crackled peacefully once more. Nathaniel released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "So, they're gone." Elias nodded. "For now. They'll return." "Yes." "When?" The old keeper looked thoughtfully into the flames. "They always come when someone mistakes remembering for owning." That night the three travelers remained inside the cottage. Eleanor soon fell asleep beside the fireplace. Nathaniel sat awake. Too many questions filled his mind. Elias quietly poured 2 cups of hot tea. He handed one to Nathaniel. The old brass cup felt pleasantly warm. After several minutes, Nathaniel finally asked. "You've never told me how you became the keeper." Elias smiled faintly. "I was asked." "By whom?" The old man stared into the dancing fire. His answer came so softly that Nathaniel almost missed it. "By the last man who carried this coat." Nathaniel waited. Elias slowly continued. "He asked me only one question." "What question?" The old keeper lifted his eyes. Their calm blue color reflected the firelight. Then he repeated the exact words spoken to him long ago. Asterisk, if every forgotten story vanished tomorrow, would you grieve for the stories, or for yourself? Asterisk. Nathaniel sat in silence. He searched for an answer. None came. Elias smiled gently. Don't worry. It took me 3 days. Outside. Far beyond the quiet cottage. Somewhere in the endless darkness. A single golden bell rang. Once. Clear. Bright. Ancient. Elias slowly stood. The road has made its decision. Nathaniel looked up. What decision? The old keeper walked toward the door. Without looking back, he quietly said. It is finally time for you to meet. He paused with one hand on the latch. The first keeper. The words lingered in the quiet cottage long after Elias had spoken them. The first keeper. Nathaniel had assumed Elias was the beginning. If someone had guarded the lantern road for centuries, then surely the old man had always been here. Now he realized how little he truly understood. Eleanor also stood. The first keeper is still alive. Elias opened the cottage door. I didn't say that. Cold air drifted inside. The endless wooden road stretched ahead, glowing faintly beneath the golden lanterns that had returned during the night. Unlike before, every lantern now pointed in the same direction. Far beyond the forest. Toward a place neither Nathaniel nor Eleanor had yet seen. They walked in silence. The road gradually narrowed until only one traveler could walk at a time. Elias led. Nathaniel followed. Eleanor remained just behind. Hours seemed to pass. Or perhaps only moments. Time had long since abandoned ordinary meaning. Eventually the giant trees disappeared. So did the golden leaves. The wooden road emerged into an enormous open plain. Nathaniel stopped. The landscape before him stole every thought from his mind. There was no darkness here. No sky. No sun. Only soft golden light stretching endlessly in every direction. The road crossed the plain like a ribbon of polished oak. Thousands of lanterns floated peacefully overhead. None moved. None flickered. The silence felt alive. Not empty. Welcoming. At the center of the plain stood a single chair. Old. Handmade. Carved from white oak. Nothing else surrounded it. No building. No monument. No gate. Just one chair. Elias approached it slowly. He removed his weathered gray hat. Nathaniel had never seen him do that before. The old keeper bowed his head. Not to the chair. To the empty space beside it. Nathaniel whispered. There's no one there. Elias smiled gently. There is. Nathaniel looked harder. At first he saw only empty air. Then. The light shifted. A faint outline appeared. Like heat rising above a summer road. Gradually it became clearer. An elderly woman sat quietly beside the chair. She wore a simple linen dress. Her silver hair rested in a loose braid across one shoulder. A walking stick leaned beside her. She looked utterly ordinary. She smiled as Nathaniel approached. The smile reminded him of every grandmother who had ever welcomed tired travelers into a warm home. No mystery. No grandeur. Only kindness. So, she said softly. Another rowan finally arrived. Nathaniel blinked. You know my family. She laughed gently. My dear. She looked toward Elias. I knew his family too. Elias stepped aside. For the first time since Nathaniel had met him. He appeared almost like a student standing before a beloved teacher. The old woman motioned toward the empty chair. Please. Nathaniel sat. The wood felt warm. comfortably familiar. She studied him quietly for several moments. Then asked, "What have you learned?" Nathaniel expected riddles. Instead, she waited patiently. He thought carefully. "I learned memories aren't treasures." She nodded. "What else?" "They shouldn't belong to anyone." Another nod. "What else?" Nathaniel looked across the endless plain. "Ordinary lives matter." Her smile widened. "Good." He continued. "And forgetting isn't always a tragedy." She closed her eyes briefly. "Very good." Eleanor quietly stepped forward. The old woman welcomed her with the same gentle smile. "And what have you learned?" Eleanor answered almost immediately. "Every map leaves something unfinished." The old woman chuckled. "I hoped someone would notice." She turned toward Nathaniel. "Your grandfather noticed too." Nathaniel's eyes widened. "You knew him." "I knew the frightened young man who first reached this place." "What happened?" He asked whether history would remember him. Nathaniel waited. "I told him." She smiled. "History rarely remembers the people who quietly make it possible." A peaceful silence followed. Nathaniel finally asked the question he had carried since first stepping onto the lantern road. "What is this place?" The old woman looked toward the countless lanterns above. "This." She paused. "Is where forgotten kindness waits." Nathaniel frowned. "Only kindness?" "Mostly." "What about wars?" "They're remembered elsewhere." "Kings?" "They remember themselves." Eleanor smiled softly. The old woman continued. "The world writes endless books about power." She gently touched the wooden chair. "We chose to remember gentleness." Nathaniel suddenly realized something. "You said, 'we.'" The old woman nodded. "There were many keepers." "How many?" She looked toward Elias. "Enough." Nathaniel laughed. "I've started answering questions like him." The three of them smiled. Even Elias. Without warning, the lanterns overhead began moving. Thousands of them. Slowly. Gracefully. They formed enormous circles across the glowing sky. Nathaniel watched in amazement. "What are they doing?" The old woman stood. "They're listening." "Listening to what?" She looked directly at him. "Your answer." Nathaniel frowned. "My answer to what?" The old woman stepped closer. For the first time, her expression became serious. Not frightening. Simply important. "When you first arrived," she said quietly, "you believed this road was about your family." Nathaniel nodded. "Then you believed it was about the keepers." Another nod. "Then about the library." He nodded again. She smiled gently. "It was never about any of those things." Nathaniel remained silent. She asked one final question. "If every book disappeared?" She looked toward the endless lanterns. "If every map burned?" She rested one hand upon the old chair. "If even this road vanished before tomorrow?" She looked directly into Nathaniel's eyes. Would the kindness inside those lives still have mattered? Nathaniel didn't answer immediately. He thought of his father, who chose to return home. He thought of the unknown physician, the farmer planting oak trees, the baker saving warm bread, old Samuel watching sunsets, Margaret quietly knitting, his mother's smile, his grandfather's maps. None of them had expected history to remember them. Yet everyone had changed someone's life. Finally, Nathaniel smiled. Yes. The answer came quietly. But not because someone remembered. The old woman's eyes brightened. Nathaniel continued. Because kindness doesn't need witnesses to be real. Silence filled the glowing plain. Then, every lantern overhead burst into warm golden light. Not brighter. Warmer. The entire horizon shimmered softly. Elias quietly closed his eyes. The old woman smiled with unmistakable pride. You've understood. Nathaniel looked around. Understood what? She gently placed one hand upon his shoulder. The lantern road was never built to preserve the past. Nathaniel waited. It exists. She looked toward the endless horizon. To remind every generation that ordinary goodness is never ordinary. A soft breeze crossed the plain. The first Nathaniel had felt since arriving. Somewhere in the distance. A door quietly opened. Not behind them. Ahead. The old woman looked toward it. Then back at Nathaniel and Eleanor. The final journey begins now. The golden light beyond the open doorway slowly grew brighter. Neither Nathaniel nor Eleanor could see what waited beyond it. But both knew. Everything they had experienced until now had only been preparing them for whatever came next. The open doorway stood alone upon the glowing plain. No walls surrounded it. No building held it upright. It simply existed, framed by weathered oak, its brass handle polished by countless unseen hands. Beyond it, there was only light. Not blinding. Not supernatural. It looked remarkably like the warm morning sunlight that entered an ordinary farmhouse kitchen after a long winter. Nathaniel found himself smiling. For reasons he could not explain, the light felt familiar. The old woman quietly stepped aside. The choice has always belonged to those who reached this place. Nathaniel looked toward Elias. The old keeper nodded once. No words. None were needed. Eleanor stood beside Nathaniel. So. She whispered. What happens now? The old woman answered gently. You both return. Nathaniel blinked. Return? Elias smiled. I told you. The road never asks anyone to stay. Nathaniel looked around the endless plain. The library? It will remain. The books? They will continue to be written. The keeper? Elias looked toward the countless lanterns above. There will always be one. Nathaniel frowned. But you said your watch was ending. It is. And someone has to replace you. Yes. Nathaniel looked from Elias to the old woman. Then back again. I don't understand. The old woman chuckled softly. You've spent this entire journey believing the keeper was a person. Nathaniel remained silent. She continued. The keeper has never been one individual. Eleanor's eyes widened. What do you mean? The keeper. The old woman smiled. Has always been everyone who chooses to remember kindness by practicing it. Nathaniel slowly felt the truth settle inside him. There had been no throne. No crown. No magical inheritance. Only responsibility. Passed quietly from one life to another. Just as kindness itself was. Elias slowly removed the long gray coat from his shoulders. Nathaniel instinctively stepped forward. No. Elias laughed warmly. I have no intention of giving it to you. Nathaniel stopped. The old keeper folded the coat carefully. Then he placed it upon the empty chair. Immediately. The fabric dissolved into hundreds of tiny golden lights. They floated upward. Joining the thousands of lanterns already shining overhead. Nathaniel watched in silence. What happened? Elias smiled. It was never the coat. The old woman looked toward Eleanor. Your grandfather carried one map. She turned toward Nathaniel. Yours carried another. Then she looked at both of them together. Neither map was complete. Nathaniel remembered the fated sentence. Asterisk, if two paths survive, neither should walk alone. Asterisk. He finally understood. The maps had never been directions to the lantern road. They had been directions toward each other. A warm breeze crossed the plain. One by one, the floating lanterns slowly drifted downward. Not toward Nathaniel. Not toward Eleanor. They spread across the endless horizon. Far away. Toward places neither of them could see. The old woman watched them with quiet satisfaction. They're leaving. Nathaniel asked. Where? Home. There are people out there who need reminding. Reminding of what? She smiled. To notice the ordinary. Nathaniel suddenly remembered something. My father's journal. He opened his satchel. The weathered leather notebook remained exactly where he had placed it. He carefully turned its pages. Every hidden message had disappeared. Every secret symbol. Every coded sentence. Only his father's observations remained. Birds. Rivers. Flowers. Weather. Simple notes from an ordinary life. Nathaniel smiled. The mystery had fulfilled its purpose. It no longer needed to hide. Eleanor unfolded her grandfather's map. The faded lines slowly vanished. One after another. Until only blank paper remained. She laughed softly. I suppose I won't be finding this place again. Elias answered gently. You never needed a map. The old woman stepped toward the doorway of light. She rested one hand upon its frame. You should go. Nathaniel hesitated. Will we remember? You'll remember enough. The road? Perhaps. The library? Sometimes. You. She smiled with the same quiet warmth she had carried from the beginning. When you choose kindness without expecting anything in return. She paused. You'll think of us. Nathaniel looked toward Elias. Will I ever see you again? The old keeper thought for a moment. Then he smiled. You already will. Nathaniel looked confused. Elias nodded toward the world beyond the doorway. Every time someone quietly helps another person without needing recognition. He placed one hand over his heart. The lantern road becomes a little longer. Nathaniel and Eleanor stepped through the doorway together. Warm sunlight greeted them. Birdsong filled the air. The scent of pine drifted upon a cool breeze. Nathaniel opened his eyes. He stood beneath the old dead pine overlooking the hills west of Ash Hollow. Morning had just begun. The mysterious wooden road had vanished. The impossible darkness was gone. Only dew-covered grass surrounded them. Eleanor stood nearby. She looked just as bewildered. The strange journey had lasted what felt like many days. Yet judging by the position of the sun, only one night had passed. Together they walked back toward Ash Hollow. As they approached the village, old Samuel Bennett looked up from his usual place beside the trading post. He smiled. I wondered if you'd found what your father hoped you'd find. Nathaniel smiled back. I think I did. Samuel nodded as though he had expected nothing less. He asked no questions. Nathaniel offered no explanations. Some stories were meant to be lived rather than told. Years passed. Ash Hollow slowly changed. Children became parents. Parents became grandparents. New homes appeared. Old cabins disappeared. Roads widened. Bridges replaced ferries. The world continued exactly as the old woman had promised. Nathaniel married. Eleanor settled in a neighboring valley, and the two families remained close for the rest of their lives. Neither of them ever found the lantern road again. Neither searched for it. They didn't need to. Instead, Nathaniel quietly became the sort of man whose life deserved a place in the library. He repaired neighbors' roofs before fixing his own. He planted trees whose shade he would never enjoy. He taught children to read using his father's weathered journal. He never asked to be remembered. Eleanor opened a small school where every child, no matter how poor, received a place by the fire during winter. When asked why, she always smiled and answered, "Everyone deserves a warm beginning." Years turned into decades. The names of Nathaniel Rowan and Eleanor Carter gradually faded from official records. No statues were built. No songs celebrated them. No history books mentioned either of them. Eventually, even Ash Hollow disappeared from newer maps. Time carried it gently into the quiet corners of forgotten history. But somewhere beyond memory, beyond ordinary roads, inside a quiet library lit by warm oil lamps, two new books slowly appeared upon neighboring shelves. One was titled, "The Man Who Chose the Ordinary Road." The other, "The Woman Who Shared Every Map." No one watched as the pages gently turned by themselves. No one heard the faint scratch of invisible ink. Yet another chapter had been added. Not because the world had remembered them, but because they had remembered the world with kindness. And high above the endless wooden road, among thousands of softly glowing lanterns, two new golden lights quietly joined the rest. They did not shine brighter than the others. They simply shone. Just enough to help the next lost traveler find the way.